Welcome to the Mid-Atlantic Tab tutorial on writing your grant budget for your EPA Brownfields grant. We have developed a grant budget worksheet that can help you build that. This worksheet was developed with MARC grants, multi-purpose assessment, RLF, and cleanup grants from EPA in mind, but it can be used for any kind of budget, project budget, or grant budget that you might be working on. So today we're going to walk through it and build a budget together to help you understand how to use this tool. All right. So in this Excel spreadsheet that is available on our website and can also be emailed from our tab account, on the first tab, we have instructions for the worksheet. As I said, it was developed for the MARC grants, which are the Brownfield grants given out by the EPA. It can be used by any kind of budget that you might be building, especially for federal grants. The level of detail in this grant worksheet is more than what is asked for in most federal grants, but it helps you to build that justification and to build a budget narrative so that later when you get your successful grant award, you can remember how you came up with your summary numbers and build that cooperative agreement. There are multiple worksheets in this workbook. I'm not going to read everything on this page. I'm just going to kind of go over it, but this walks you through each of those worksheets. Each worksheet is dedicated to one of the budget categories, except for personnel and fringe, which are often tied to each other, and so they are together on a single worksheet. And then all of those yellow tabs that you see at the bottom feed into the green tabs to give you your totals. So again, there's some additional information here about the different tabs. The next tab is the summary budget, which is the short version that you can copy and paste right into your grant narrative if need be, or to copy the information into a table. The full budget breaks that same information down a little bit. Again, it's totaling from all of the other tabs. And then each of those categories has a category. Each of those categories has a tab. So this is built again with MARC grants in mind. Right now, MARC grants are currently 4 years, so that's how we have it defaulted as, but you can change a lot of this information and we'll go through what you should change and what you should leave alone. And then there's some additional information about allowable costs, how to determine where costs land, etc. And all of those details for each category are also in the tab dedicated to that category so that you have it handy as you walk through the document. So we're going to walk through every tab, and all of this detail is also available in each tab, so you have it handy. We're going to skip these green tabs for now because those are the summaries and pulling from the yellow tabs. And throughout, you're going to focus on anything yellow to edit. So we're going to start with personnel and fringe. As you can see, there are different yellow boxes. And again, that's where you want to make your edits. Other cells have formulas in them and are totaling and doing all of the math for you, which is why this is such a beautiful sheet. So make sure that you're focusing on all tabs on the yellow. So the first thing you're going to look at is the length of the project. As I said, most EPA grants at the time of this recording are 4 years, so that is the default. But if for some reason, if you're using this for a different grant, if your project length is different than the typical, you can change that right here and it will help, it will adjust throughout the formulas. All right. I also have pre-filled all of the tasks. So when you're writing your budget, you're going to want to divide it into the different tasks of your project. Again, we are focusing on how you might write an assessment budget. So I have pulled some typical tasks that we see in an assessment budget. So the first one is program administration, which would be your management of the grant and your management of your contractors. Community outreach, which is how you are communicating with the community where your target areas are. Site inventory and prioritization, which is building that inventory, picking which sites to assess. Your assessment activities, which are only the environmental site assessment activities and anything related to that. And then planning activities for some of those other planning things that are allowed as in an assessment grant, like feasibility studies and market analyses. All right, so that's there. You'll also see that throughout the document, there are these red flags where there's some additional information. Things like here, it says enter the names or positions of your staff. These are all formulas that assume full-time. If people are not full-time, you can adjust those rates accordingly. And then these formulas are all based on a percentage effort. So if someone is 100% full-time in their job, how much of that time will they be dedicating to these different activities? So let's get into it. All right, so some typical personnel you might see would be your, let's say, executive director. And let's assume that they are working at a rate of $75,000 a year. Again, all of these calculations are based on percentage effort, and so they are based on an annual salary as opposed to hourly. If you would prefer to build a budget around hourly, if you reach out to WVU tab, we can help you adjust those formulas to make the math work better for you. We're going to say that you have a program manager who's going to manage more of the day-to-day of the grant. And let's say that they're at 60,000. And again, these are just examples of salaries. You put in whatever your actual salaries are for your staff. And maybe your third person is a financial manager who's going to help you with your budgets and help you with any other reporting, budget management, stuff like that. And let's say that they're at 70,000. So the total effort section you can see is white. That's because it's pulling to a total amount from all of your tasks. So you want to focus on how much are these folks going to be working on each task. So let's say that your executive director, who is ultimately responsible for all of your reporting and is the key contact for your organization, is probably going to put in a little bit of effort, at least on the program administration. So let's give them 5% on this task. And again, this is calculating over the full length of the project. So 5% of $75,000 a year is not $15,000. However, 5% of $75,000 over 4 years is $15,000. And that's the math. And you can see in the formula line what that formula is. The formulas are not locked. So if you are familiar with Excel and you do need to make adjustments, you can, but I strongly suggest that you don't unless you really are familiar with Excel, because everything is very tied closely together. All right. Let's say that your executive director is really not going to be that engaged on this project outside of that program administration. So they're going to help with overseeing. They're going to help you with that selection of your qualified environmental professional and your contractors, but they're not going to be involved in the day-to-day. They're not going to do any of the community outreach or the inventory prioritization or the assessment activities. So we're done with them. Your program manager, however, is the main contact on your grant. So it is likely that they are going to be doing quite a bit across all tasks. Maybe not enough to be a full-time position, but at least touching every task. So let's say that they're going to have to be doing a lot of that program administration. They're going to be doing the reporting. They're going to be managing any contractors. So they are likely to be at something like 5% as well. They're definitely going to be overseeing all of your community outreach, which is an important part of the grant. So let's give that something like a 7%. And again, this may vary. You may not be paying any of your staff on this grant. You may be doing that as in-kind. That's okay as well. But I want to make sure that we touch every tab so that you have examples of how it will work. Site inventory and prioritization. So typically this is led by your program manager with significant support from your contractor. So let's give that a little bit, maybe something like 4%. And assessment activities and planning activities are done almost entirely by, if not entirely by, your qualified environmental professional and other contractors. So we're going to leave that at 0 for all of your staff. And you can see that it's totaling my effort over here. It's giving me the task totals in each section, and then it's giving me a final total overall for each individual person. And then finally, your financial manager is not going to be working on any of the day-to-day project stuff. They are going to be helping to support the management of your contracts, the submission of your financial reports. And so let's put them at something like a 2%. All right, so there is our personnel, so that's totaled at 59%. As we said before, fringe benefits are tied very closely to personnel, and so I've left that in the same tab so that you can see it. And I've just picked a typical rate of fringe is about 31%. Again, you would change that to whatever it might be. And then that's the only thing you need to change in this section. If you have employees who are part-time, you would put their rate here, and then you would need to change the formulas in this section so that it is calculating it appropriately. Right now, this assumes that all of your staff are full-time, excuse me. And so if you need to adjust that, you would need to adjust that formula. If you're not sure how to do that, again, that's something that we can help you with. You also can add more staff if you need to, just by inserting. If you do a right click on one of these rows and do insert, it should adjust and include that new line in the formula. So you shouldn't have to do anything on the formulas. But again, always call us. So you can see it's totaled all of that, and it's totaled everything at the end and H by task. And again, down here, we have some instructions. It tells you a little bit about what those formulas are calculating. And then it tells you which in the columns that you should be editing, what you should be editing, and always our contact information in case you need to reach out. All right, let's build a travel budget. All right, so I'm going to assume for this travel budget that we're going to do all 4 of these trip types for this grant. Again, you may not do that, but this way you'll see how they all work. So let's start with a national conference. That conference is usually 3 days in the middle of a week with a couple of days at the front and the end that have a half day. So let's assume that you are going to go to most of it, including your travel. And so that's going to be a 4-day trip. Again, you could change that however you want. Most of the national conferences are in large metropolitan areas across the country. The next one, as I'm recording this, is in Chicago. We're going to assume that you need to fly, so we're going to skip the mileage for now. If you're going to drive there instead of flying, or if you need to drive to the airport, definitely add that in here as well. All right, so we're going to skip mileage. We are going to put the event registration. This has kind of already got a sample cost at $150. That is the typical cost for local governments or nonprofits, right around there. For the national conference, they do have a sliding scale, but you just would want to update that. You could update it if there's any information available now. If there's not, $150 is a good estimate for that. We're going to assume that 2 folks are going to go on this, that maybe your executive director and that program manager are going to go to the national conference to learn more. So let's say we're going to need to register 2 people. All right, lodging. All of the rates that are listed here are based on GSA rates at the time of the most recent version of the template. And those are based on the states in Region 3. For a place like Chicago, the GSA rate is going to be higher than that. So you do want to double check that website to make sure that you're using the most up-to-date information. I'm guessing you couldn't get a room a very nice room in Chicago for $98. So you might want to update that. But for now, we're going to leave it just to leave our formulas in place. This formula seems to be messed up. We're just going to fix that. All right. So as I said before, this box is calculating how many, based on a 4-day trip, you would need a 3-night stay. And then your per diem is figuring out that the GSA standard for per diem is to do a 75% reimbursement for your travel days. So that's assuming on, let's say you left on Monday and you come back on Thursday. So this formula allows for that. And then it's calculating that. The total formula, or the hotel formula, you may, if you're a math whiz, know that 3 times 98 is not $588. But what this is doing is, because you said you're buying 2 registrations, it assumes you would need 2 rooms, and it does that math. And then finally, your airfare. A good way to budget for airfare is just to go to Google Flights, or go to some other your favorite place where you typically buy your airfare, and just get an idea of how much it would be to fly from your usual airport to a major metropolitan area. We're going to say $350 for now. And again, we have 2 people going, and so it's doing that. So now you have your trip total of $1,794.50, and you can see that it has pulled national conference from this box here. You don't need to type in the trip types in this column. It does pull that. It's pulled the total, and then we'll come back over here in a minute to talk about how many of these trips you're going to have. All right, let's do the same thing for the state conference. Most state conferences are more like 2 to 2.5 days. So let's say that you're going to go on this trip for 3 days. Let's assume if you're going to a state conference in your own state that you probably are going to drive, and that your mileage, you want to make sure you're allowing for round trip mileage. You've got to get there and get back. So let's estimate approximately 150 miles one way. Again, you would want to map that just to get a general estimate. It's calculating that. A lot of those conference registrations in our region are around $200. The Maryland conference is is cheaper than that. So you just would want to make sure that you're estimating for that. Let's assume again that your executive director and your program manager are going to attend that. So it does that. Again, it's pulled, the formula has calculated how many nights stay you would need, and that 2 people would need that room, and that and what your per diem would be, and we don't need airfare again. And again, you can see that this has pulled up into there. All right. Up next, we have community meetings. And again, in this part, we're only estimating how much it costs for one of these trips. We're not estimating how many times you're going to make those trips yet. That's going to come in a minute. All right, so community meeting is presumably pretty nearby and you don't need to stay overnight anywhere. So that's a 1-day trip. You're probably going to drive there. So, and presumably no matter if all 3 of your personnel that are listed here are going, you're going to probably go in one car together at the most. I would think that your financial manager is not traveling to these community meetings. And since it's nearby, let's assume that your round trip is about 30 miles. That gives you that, excuse me, mileage. You don't need to register, you don't need a room, you don't need a per diem, and you don't need a flight. So that's a pretty simple one. And then I think probably similar for your site visit. You're going to have the same thing. Again, we put that in there. We're going to have our mileage. Maybe your community meeting might be more likely in the center of your target area, but maybe some of your sites are a little bit more far flung. So let's estimate a little bit higher for that. So some of your sites may be closer than that 15-mile radius. Some of them may be further away. So let's assume maybe a 30-mile radius for your trips. So round trip for your site visits. And so that would be a 60-mile round trip. And there's your math. All right. Now coming back up over here, you can see that we have all of our trips here. We have all of our totals here. And now we're going to decide by task how many of each of these kinds of trips we're going to have. So typically we see things like national conferences and state conferences listed in the budget for that program administration task. So I'm going to put that here. As I said, the national conference usually happens every other year. So let's assume that in a grant period of 4 years, you may go to 2 national conferences. So if we put that 2 in this yellow box, then it's going to calculate that total cost. And then the state conferences, however, are every year. So let's assume you'll be able to make it every year and do 4. And then your community meetings. So community meetings are likely going to be under your community outreach task. And I would recommend doing those at least every quarter. Maybe sometimes they'll be virtual, but it's good to estimate having a quarterly community meeting or some kind of outreach to your community on the quarter, but maybe some of those are going to be virtual so that you can hit everyone and so that you can avoid bad weather in the winter. So let's assume that about half of them for our purposes here are going to be in person. So 4 quarters over 4 years is 16, but only half, so 8. I'm just going to break that math down a little slower. So if you have 16 quarters in your period, you're going to have 16 community meetings, but only half of those are going to be in person. So let's call that 8. Your site visits are most likely going to be, for you, are going to most likely fall under your site inventory and prioritization task if you need to do those. Your contractor is going to be visiting those sites, maybe in assessment activities. But let's put your site visits under that inventory and prioritization. You don't need to go to every site that you put on your inventory, and you don't need to, your program manager, your executive director does not need to go to every site that gets assessed. But you might want to go to a few. So let's say that over 4 years, you might go to 1 or 2 a year and estimate about 6 of those. So again, you can see that it's calculated by each kind of trip, what our total would be, and then also each task, what our total is. All right, so there's your travel budget. Up next, we have a tab for equipment. I have never seen in my over a decade of doing this, anybody have equipment costs related to their assessment grant. So I'm not going to fill that out. I can't even think of an example for you of what you would have, but there it is in case you do have it or in case you want to use this for something else where you would buy equipment. All right. Up next, we have supplies. So we don't see a lot of supplies in an assessment grant, but you definitely might need stuff. You might need to get paper to print some stuff in your in-house. You might need meeting materials. So this is a pretty simple one. Basically, you're just going to put in what it would be. So let's say you're going to need some copy paper to print some flyers. Over the course of your grant, you think you're going to use maybe 2 reams of paper. Sorry, 2 reams of paper would go here. And a ream of paper costs about $15. Again, look that up to make sure. And make sure that you're putting this in the right column. So you want to make sure that that goes where it is. So if we're talking about copy paper, that's probably related to outreach. So we want to say we're going to have 2 reams of paper. The paper costs $15. So we need about $30. Maybe we're going to buy, you cannot pay for food unless you call for meetings. You can do participant support costs, which you would not put in supplies. And that's a little more complex, and we can talk that through with you if you want to include that in your grant. But maybe there's some other just general office supplies that you might need, pens, papers, that sort of thing, as part of your day-to-day work. And let's say that that's about $5 a unit, and you're going to need something like 20 of that, right? You don't have to get this detailed in your budget narrative on the supplies, but it just helps to match the formulas. All right. Now we'll get into contractual. So the contractual is where you're going to include how much you're going to need to allow for that qualified environmental professional, or QEP, the folks that are going to be doing your environmental assessments, any kind of planning activities, etc. Most likely you're going to award this in a single contract, maybe a couple of contracts after you go through a procurement process. At this point, you don't really know what those hourly rates are going to come to, but you can estimate, you know, how many site assessments you want to do, or what your target is, you know, how many phase 1, phase 2s you're going to try to do, because you're going to have to write that in your narrative. And we can estimate based on that how much that might be. I'm going to use some estimates for a phase 1 or a phase 2 based on the numbers that I have been seeing most recently when I made this grant. But you want to make sure that you're checking in your area, because when you explain your costs breakdown in your grant, you want to make sure that you have that detail there. All right, so we know we're going to do some phase 1 environmental site assessments. We know we're going to do some phase 2 environmental site assessments. We know we want to do a feasibility study, and that we want to do a reuse plan. So that's what we're going to estimate. I'm going to suggest an estimated cost for phase 1 of about $5,500. Those are going to vary based on any number of factors at your specific site. But again, you're just trying to estimate. Phase 2, we're going to estimate at about $35,000. This could be a little less if you have a smaller site. It could be way more if you have a very large site. So consider that when you're thinking about your target sites and making your budget. But on average, we're going to estimate about $35,000 for our purposes today. A feasibility study, you can check to make sure that your numbers are up to date on the EPA's website about eligible planning activities. They do have great workups about the different kinds of eligible planning activities. And on those workups, they have estimates of how much they think these cost. We're going to estimate about $20,000 for this today, for both the reuse plan and the feasibility study. All right, you're not going to do these in your program administration. You're not going to do them in your community outreach. You're not going to do them in inventory. Oh, I guess we do also, however, you may have some contractual support in your inventory and prioritization. I'm going to suggest you estimate that hourly and call that something like 150. You may also have your contractor support some of your community outreach, and let's do that hourly as well. And we'll just do that same. Again, these are just estimates. You want to make sure that you've kind of talked. If you've never done this before, a good way to estimate that would be to talk to people in your area, talk to your state environmental agency about kind of costs that they have seen, so that you can make sure that you're hitting what is currently in the market. I'm just changing some of those the colors of those cells, because I noticed that they weren't yellow. So any of the yellow cells is what you want to edit. So again, you're not going to have any contractual costs in your program administration, most likely. Your community outreach support at 150 might come in here. So let's say maybe they help you with those meetings. We said we were going to have 16 meetings. they've got to do a little bit of prep and come to those meetings. So let's estimate about 25 hours for that. They're going to help you prep your site inventory and maintain that inventory throughout. So let's say that that's maybe going to take them over the life of your grant another 40 hours. Again, I'm just estimating. And then your assessment activities are all going to fall under here. Maybe you think you're going to do about 10 phase ones, let's say 15 phase ones in your assessment. And then your phase twos are going to be, excuse me, a subset of that. You're not going to do as many phase twos as you are phase ones. So let's say that maybe you're going to do 5 of those. All right. And then your planning activities, you've got some reuse plan and feasibility support. Let's say we're going to do a couple of each of those for our purposes today. All right, so there you have your total contractual. You can see again, it's totaling in each activity, it's totaling in each task, and then giving you totals at the end as well. All right, so there's your contractual. We're almost there. Construction on an assessment grant, you're not going to have construction. On a cleanup grant, based on new guidelines from EPA in the last couple of years, there are going to be some services that are considered construction and not just all contractual. You can work with us to help figure out what that looks like. This is the guidance from EPA about what they consider construction as opposed to contractual, and we can help you figure that out as well. But again, on an assessment grant, you're unlikely to have anything contractual. You're not doing any erecting anything, altering anything, or repairing anything. You're just doing some of those assessment, maybe some soil samples, or samples of potential asbestos material. And then finally, you have other. So other is a little of a catch-all. As I said before, if you're going to do things like you want to have food at your meetings, that would be called participant support costs, and those would be included here. I'm not going to include that here today because it's not a typical cost that we see across the board, and it is a little bit more complex. Other things that you might put is if you have to rent meeting space, that's not really a supply, so you might put that in here, but most people can get that for free. There may be promotional materials that you want to purchase that wouldn't just be paper, that would be, or, having someone design or print a flyer for you. Postage might come here. It's also where you might include any subawards. So different than contractual or subawards. Subawards don't require you to do a competitive procurement process. That would be if you have a partner on your grant, somebody that's going to help you dole out some of that money if you're working on a coalition grant and some of it's going to get subbed somewhere. Maybe it's not a coalition grant, you're a county and you're going to have a countywide assessment, but you want to just sub some of that money to one of your municipalities to administer themselves. You could do that. You might also, some grantees that are smaller and haven't managed as many federal grants work with their area development district or local development district or regional planning development council to help administer their grant. So you might want to include some of that. But you want to make sure that it is something that would in fact be a subaward and not a contractor when you're budgeting for it and when you do your selection process. And again, that's something we can help with. We're not going to do any of that in this grant today, but it's definitely allowable. So now that we've done our yellow tabs, we're almost done. We're going to come back to this full budget tab here, and you can see that it's pulled all of the data from our other tabs into our main. We can type here that we're applying for a community-wide assessment grant and that our applicant is the city of Brownfields, USA. All right, so again, it's pulled all of this information for us. It's pulling all of these direct tasks. It's also calculating your indirect costs. So the maximum allowable indirect cost is 5%. You do not have to charge an indirect cost or administrative cost on your grant. If you don't want to do that, you can just delete this part and it'll delete it everywhere. You can also change it if you want to do a smaller amount. The way to change it would be, so you can delete it. You also can just change this to 0 and then it'll eliminate it. You could change it to something else that you want to apply. You can apply it differently, but it is just going to be set to that default. You cannot charge more than 5% of your grant to indirect or administrative costs. And there's some more information about that here. That's the only cell on this sheet that you should edit. Everything else is pulling from those other calculations on the other page. So here and your title at the top are the only places you want to edit. And you can see that based on our calculations, we're under the $500,000 limit for community-wide assessment grants. So we are all set. We might see that and think, oh, okay, maybe I can do a few more phase ones, and you could go back and edit that. If you got to this part and you figured out that your budget is a little bit over, you could go to the other tabs and tweak that as well. But now you can kind of see everything in one place. All right, so now we have our full budget. The only thing left to do is go check our summary budget for submission tab, where it's pulled just those totals. This is the level of detail that you want in your budget table in your narrative. You can copy and paste this into your budget. You just want to make sure that when you do that, it is readable and that it's not taking up too much space. So in some cases, that easiest way to do that is to copy it as a table and put it in there. In some cases, it's to copy it as a photo. In some cases, you may just have to make a table and manually enter it. But the most important thing is to make sure that the reviewer can read it and that you get all of the totals right and you don't take up too much space. So that's your budget. Now you've built your budget, and as things change, you can go and tweak it and you don't have to redo all that math, which is the best part of this. And hopefully this helps make at least part of your grant writing experience a little easier and not quite as stressful and painful. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and let us know if you have any questions.